Well, good morning and welcome again to our online Bible study. Our theme is Your Kingdom Come, Your Will Be Done, talking about God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But today we're going to be talking about spiritual warfare for God's kingdom to come on this earth. We have an enemy here, and his name is Satan. He was there in the Garden of Eden. He tempted Eve, and Adam and Eve fell into sin, and as a result, the world went into a spin. It didn't turn out the way that God wanted it to, but He gave man free will. He put us here. He gave us dominion. He told us to subdue. He still says that this earth is ours. Psalm 115, the highest heavens are the Lord's, they're Yahweh's. But the earth He has given to the children of men. He's given this earth to us. I hear people say, well, why does God allow this? Why has God not done something about the evil in this world? Well, He has. He put us here. That's our responsibility. It's our job. We can't sit back in our lazy boys and say, oh, well, God is sovereign. He'll take care of that. Whatever He wants, que sera, sera. That's not how it works. He put us here. He said, this is your world. This is your domain, if you will. You take charge. You take authority. Jesus said, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions. Those are symbols of demonic spirits. So I've given you authority over snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. So that was what He was telling His disciples to do. You take authority. I've given you authority. You take that authority. You use the authority that I've given unto you, and you take dominion. You take back what the enemy is stolen and is trying to steal. So we are here for a reason, for a purpose. This is our domain. And we can't just sit back and turn it over to the devil and say, well, God must want this, or He allowed it. Yeah, God gives all of us free will. Even Satan, He gives Satan free will. He gives the angels free will. He gives us free will. But He said, you have the authority. I've given it to you. Now, He also said, if you need help, He said, ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you'll find. Knock and the door will be open to you. If you need my help, I'm here. But otherwise, it's yours. So we're in a battle, and I think people, especially Christians, are scratching their heads, and they're in no better position than the rest of the world. Because they wonder, oh, well, why is God allowing this? Is this the end time? No, it's not. But the enemy knows that his time is running out, and he wants to do all the damage he can do before that happens. He's hoping that he can avoid it. He's hoping that he can stop it. But his day is coming, and there is no stopping that. But Satan doesn't know that. He's trying his best to do his dastardly deeds as long and as hard as he can. So we're going to get into this in our scripture today that's coming to us from 1 Samuel chapter 22, verses 1 through 18. This is a story about David and Saul. So David departed from there. Where was he? Excuse me. He was in Philistine territory. He was in Gath at the time. He went into enemy territory. And we'll get into the reason why he went there in a few minutes. But David departed from Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. and everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and my mother stay with you till I know what God will do for me." And he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. Now Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin." Now, by the way, Benjamin was the tribe that King Saul came from. So this was his tribe. So he's talking to his people. He says, "Hear now, people of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse," that's talking about David, "will the son of Jesse, David, give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day." Then answered Doeg, the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, "Hey, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Then the king sent to summon Ahimelech, the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob. And all of them came to the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." That's talking about Ahimelech the priest. And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." And Saul said unto him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he is risen against me to lie in wait as at this day?" Then Ahimelech answered the king, "Who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. Let the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little." And the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." And the king said to the guard who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priest of the Lord, because their hand also is with David." And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priest of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, "You turn and strike the priest." And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priest. And he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod, talking about the priest. 85 priests he killed. Okay, as we begin looking and diving into this, I mean, this is very key, and I think there's some real good lessons that we can learn from this story. Number one, what do you do when you know that the Lord has chosen you for a special purpose? Now, David knew this. He knew that he was anointed by God. The prophet Samuel had come to him and anointed him to be the next king of Israel. So he knew that God had chosen him. But the enemy is doing everything he can to stop you. Now just notice that. This is true in our lives. Just because you're chosen of God doesn't mean that you're not going to have some big challenges in your life, or that you won't have opposition. I've experienced that in my own life. It hasn't been easy. There have been times that, my heart's been broken. And I'm sure that David had gone through those experiences as well. But the enemy was doing everything to stop him, and was even trying to kill him, to prevent him from fulfilling his destiny. Well, the same is true in our case, right? Now, in this particular case, it's the one who is in political power. We could call it the deep state of that day. The one that was in political power, he happened to be possessed by an evil spirit. Remember, he even had hired or had David as a young shepherd boy. He had him come and play his musical instruments just to calm him down, because he would have an evil spirit that would come over him, and the music seemed to soothe him down. So he was possessed by an evil spirit. There's no doubt about it. But this person who had the political power with this evil spirit that was possessing him, he's got David in his bullseye. And they're using all his authority and resources, his military intelligence agencies, if you will, the CIA of that day, to track you down. I mean, there's spies everywhere trying to track David down in order to destroy him. Now, in this case, like I said before, David had been anointed by the prophet Samuel to be the next king of Israel. But he's being hunted down by a jealous, obsessive, demonic-filled king, King Saul, who, by the way, he was David's father-in-law and the father of David's best friend, Jonathan. So there were family connections here. But that didn't make his situation any better. When King Saul heard the women singing this little song, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000. Man, now this was concerning their military campaigns against the Philistines. King Saul was galled. He was outraged. He was incensed to no end. In his insecurity, in his pride, in his competitiveness, he felt threatened. He felt like a failure. He didn't want to be in second place to David. He was, after all, the king. All the glory, all the praise should be going to him, not to David or anyone else. But instead of dealing with his own weaknesses, he did everything that he could to remove and destroy the competition. That's what he decided to do. Now, at this point, David doesn't have any official power. He doesn't have an army. He doesn't have manpower. There's no one that has his back. So what does David do? I mean, King Saul has threatened his life. He tried to throw a spear at him and pin him to the wall when he was in King Saul's house. So he knew he was in danger, so he fled. But where did he go to? Where did David go? He went to Philistine territory. He went to Gath. This is in the southern part of Israel. This in the plains of the Philistines. Not on the seacoast, but in the plains in the southern part of Israel. So David goes to Gath until it was no longer safe to be there. Until the king said, well, isn't this the one that they sing their songs about? And he's come here? So the king is saying that, the king of the Philistines is saying, we don't want him here. And David's just by himself, so what does he do? He starts foaming at the mouth and he pretends like he's insane. And the king says, we don't want this madman here. Get him out of here. So it was no longer safe. I mean, David didn't have any backing. There was no one with him. He just thought he was just trying to get out of the way of King Saul. But how stupid is that? Why would you want to go into enemy territory? Well, sometimes you don't make very good decisions when you're being attacked. When you're got your back against the wall. When you don't have anybody to help you. Sometimes you make some bad decisions. And so David had to leave out of the Philistine territory. So here it says, David departed from there, from Gath, from the Philistine territory. And he escaped to the cave of Adullam. Well, that's pretty good. Find you a safe place to stay. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Now, his brothers were all older than David. His brothers had been in the military for a good while. But, all his father's house heard about this, and they went down to the cave of Adullam. So this was in the south again of the nation of Israel. But notice that not only does the enemy threaten you, but your family also. So if the enemy can't get to you personally, he'll try to get to you through those you love. Years and years ago, decades ago, there was a crusade in the county, and I had signed up to be one of the counselors of that, in that crusade, but I had a little, I don't know how you call it, but say an argument with my sister, and I just wasn't feeling very good about the situation that night. And then she goes, well, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to do? It's like, when someone in your family or someone close to you attacks you, that hits you pretty hard. So here the enemy is using would try to use David's family to get to him. So, the enemy would take the family members and use them as hostage just to get to David. So here his family comes to David. So David, not only did he have to take care of his own situation, but now he had to ensure the safety of his own family. He had to make sure that they had adequate security to protect them from being used as blackmail or as a hostage situation or as an emotional weapon, if you will, against him. So in verses 3 and 4, David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. That was on the other side of the Jordan River, on the eastern side, in Moab territory. We could talk about Moab, that they're the descendants of Lot, but when the Hebrew people came to take possession of the land of Canaan, the Moabites tried to destroy them, did not want them passing through their territory. So, there's been some issues with the Moabites before, but now David is looking to the Moabites to protect his father and mother. Please let them stay with you till I know what God will do for me. And so he left them with the king of Moab. Now his brothers, they're military men, so they can take care of themselves. But he wants to take care of his parents. So he left them with the king of Egypt. And then they stayed with the king of Egypt all the time that David was in the stronghold. So David wanted to take care of his parents, make sure that they were safe. Now, David began to have a backing of a small group of people in the nation. They were very loyal to David. They were militarily skillful. They knew how to fight, and they were willing to fight, and they were willing to fight for David. And so David was able to build up a very small army. I mean, it's like Gideon's army, right? In verse 2, it says, everyone. But here's the type of people that gathered around him. Everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. What a group. Those in distress and debt and bitter. And he became commander over them, and there was with him about 400 men. But you got to think that the whole time during King Saul's reign and after that, even with David's reign, there was always war. They were fighting against the enemy, mainly the Philistines. So wartime and the economy in wartime is not always good, is it? And here were people that couldn't find work, didn't have a job. They were in distress. I mean, when you're out of work and you don't have money, it's very challenging. And I know that during the coronavirus, that has been true. Jobs have closed. People have been laid off or curtailed in some way. And people get distressed and stressed out during times like that. They get bitter in their souls. But anyway, they gathered around David because they saw David as hope for them. And they were very loyal to him. But, this is Gideon's army. I mean, what is this size army, 400 people? What's that against Saul's army? He's got thousands. David didn't want to come against Saul's army. Not only because, of the size of it, but, David wasn't afraid of, he faced the giant, so that's not a big deal with him, but he didn't want to fight Saul. He was leaving that in God's hand the whole time. He wasn't trying to usurp. He wasn't being a traitor to Saul. He wasn't trying to start a revolution against the government of Saul. But had it not been for the Lord on David's side. Read that in the Psalms. It'll say that, had it not been for the Lord, where would we be? Had it not been for the Lord on David's side, where would he have been? For the Lord sent the prophet Gad to give him guidance. What did Gad tell him? Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. So he was listening to the voice of the Lord. He was wanting guidance. So that was good. But in the meantime, King Saul had his spies everywhere. And they had discovered the the whereabouts of David, or where he was generally located. So Saul, in his demented, manic mind, he was brewing and stewing over David's escaping his capture, and he became angry with his own men. Here's what he said. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin." Like I said before, King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. So he's talking to his own tribe members, or family members, if you will. "Will the son of Jesse, who's of the tribe of Judah, will he give you any of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds?" In other words, has David made political promises to you that if he was in power, that he would do certain things for you? Is that the reason that all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. Jonathan made a covenant with David. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son Jonathan has stirred up my servant David against me to lie in wait as it is this day. Well, that's a lie. That's propaganda. David was not lying in wait for King Saul. He was not trying to kill King Saul. He was just trying to stay out of his way. He was trying to find a place to hide, to stay out of the way. So this was a lie. But anyway, oh, y'all don't care about me. You're not helping me. And you got to think, well, what did his own people, what did his own family members, what did his tribe, what were their emotions about David? Probably had some mixed emotions. For David had never tried to undermine or destroy King Saul's authority or power. They had never seen any signs of David trying to usurp the kingdom. David had never tried to lead a coup against King Saul. And they had witnessed all this. But on the other hand, they saw King Saul and they knew how he was, that he wasn't all there. I mean, he had his issues. He was demonic. He had an evil spirit controlling his life. So I'm sure that they had some mixed emotions about David. David had remained completely loyal and dedicated to do all that Saul required of him. He did whatever Saul told him to do. And he did it well, by the way. He was very successful, by the way, in doing it. But there's a foreigner, an outsider in this group who had no qualms about turning David over to Saul. This foreigner was actually a descendant of Esau, who was the twin brother of Jacob, if you remember. If you read the book of Obadiah, you'll see that throughout their history, there was an ancient hostility between the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau. And the descendants of Esau were, they were not very brotherly. They did not care about the descendants of Jacob. And they did not support or help them at all. And the same is true. You see it demonstrated here with Doeg, who's an Edomite. Nor did he have any respect or honor for those in the house of God. You see, Esau was not a godly man, and that passed on from generation to generation. So there was no respect and there was no honor for those of the house of God. So here it says in verses 9 and 10, "Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, That's the priest, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Doeg is a squealer. He's a leaker. He's a spy, but he's a foreign spy. And he's letting King Saul know that Ahimelech had helped David. When David tried to leave and get away from Saul, when he learned that Saul was trying to kill him, he left in a hurry, and he didn't have any provisions. He didn't have any weapons. He had nothing to defend himself with. And so he'd stopped off to see Ahimelech. And so Ahimelech had given him food and supplies and had given him, because Ahimelech had the sword of Goliath, and that's the only thing that he had with him. Had there with Ahimelech. And so he gave it to David. After all, David was the one that had killed Goliath, so he gave it to him. And so Ahimelech didn't know all the details. He didn't know, David didn't say, I'm running, I'm trying to get away from King Saul. He didn't tell him that. He just said, I'm on a mission and I'm in a hurry, and I left in such a hurry that I don't have what I need for my journey. And Ahimelech had helped him. So when Doeg told Saul that Ahimelech, the priest, had prayed for David, had given him provisions and the sword of Goliath, Saul was livid. There was smoke coming out of his ears. He was fuming. How dare the priest violate the separation of church and state and provide assistance to the fugitive David, even though Ahimelech had helped David many times in the past without any consequence. David was the son-in-law of King Saul. He was his bodyguard. He was one of the commanders of the army. So Ahimelech didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing. And so in his defense, Ahimelech told Saul, he said, and who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and captain of your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I inquired of God for him? No, let the king impute anything to his servant, or let not the king impute anything to the servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing at all this, much or little. I don't know what you're talking about. I've always helped David. But here's the thing. King Saul had no fear of God at this point. And he was so full of unreasonable anger that he said to the priest, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. See, he wasn't content just to kill Ahimelech. He says, I'm going to kill your whole family. Wait a minute. Isn't that a little exaggerated? The scripture says that a person should die for their own sin, not their children or grandchildren. Everyone should die for receive the punishment for their own sins. But here, Saul says, I'm going to kill the whole house. Not just you, everybody. And then the king turns to the guard who stood about him. He says, kill the priest of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. They didn't tell me. David was fleeing and they helped him, and nobody told me. Do you think that the servant that Saul had said, kill all the priests, don't you think that his eyes got as big as saucers? You want me to kill the priest? And the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priest of the Lord. They didn't do it. The servants of the king didn't do it. You want me to kill the priest? Are you serious? So not only was Saul not content to execute Ahimelech only, he wanted to destroy the priesthood as well. And he didn't want to listen to the voice of reason. This is therefore what happens when you have a tyrannical government that begins to think that they're above the human law and above the law of God as well. There are those in power today that think they're above the law and that they can kill and steal and destroy all they want to and that there are no consequences. That's what they think. But there is. And now you're touching God's people, God's chosen priest, the priesthood. You're going to kill them? For what? But here's Doeg, the Edomite, the deep state player. He has no qualms about doing this. He's willing to do the dirty work. What happens? He killed 85 innocent priests with one fell swoop. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priest and killed in that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. Woo! I wouldn't want to be in Doeg's shoes for you to kill the priest. Innocent, who had done nothing wrong, and you are responsible. You know, nothing has changed much today with those in power who will assassinate, like Seth Rich, for example, who was killed. There's been many people who, when they have come forward to speak against some people that have been in power, suddenly they're dead. There are people in power that think they can get away with murder, who will assassinate, blackmail, spy on their opponents, murder innocent people, mass shootings, and try to silence the voice and the work of the church. Isn't it interesting that during this coronavirus shutdown, that it was not mandatory. This was not mandatory from what the president and his team were saying. They didn't say that churches had to shut down completely. What they were trying to do is protect the people from the deep state who would not, care about murdering innocent people. And, we've seen church shootings and school shootings and all these things. And these people are, they don't care. They'll kill innocent people right and left, and it won't affect them at all. But, there were certain states, certain places where they were finding people who came, for example, I heard one report of people that were coming, this was during Easter, and they came in their cars with their windows rolled up, and they were being fined. They were being fined for breaking the law. That's not what it was all about. Yeah, social distancing, using hygiene, those kinds of things, keeping the spread of the virus. But there were some in power in certain states who were abusing their power. And I saw, I think it was Michigan, where they were protesting. they were at the state capitol, there were lines of cars and trucks, and they were blaring their horns. They had their windows up, but they were protesting against their Democratic governor and her being a dictator and the way she was handling this whole situation, where she was locking down the people. This is a tyrannical type of thing here. And that was not what was intended. But it just exposed the ones who are that type of governmental figure, who want to be the dictator, who want to control the masses of people, and they'll do it by any means possible. Here's a Q drop, and Q is a military intelligence operation, just leaking clues to the public, to the general public, as to what's going on. Now, legally, they can't give you all the details, and their messages are a little cryptic, and you have to research, and that's what Q says. Search for yourself. Do your own research. Think for yourself. Don't just listen to the mainstream media. But this was a recent post, and it said, the public will learn the truth. I mean, the truth's going to come out. The media will attempt to spin as a partisan attack. The media is going to say, oh, well, Trump's doing this, or, oh, they're doing it to attack us, politically. The House, that's the House of Representatives, will push for the Attorney General Barr's removal because he's doing his job, because he's bringing their crimes, and he's going to serve justice on the people who have done these crimes. The House of Representatives will open investigations into Barr and Durham. Here are they're the attorney generals who are doing the investigation, who are getting all the evidence and putting together the cases against these people. But they're going to attack. The House of Representatives is going to start investigations just like they did with Trump. Lack of confidence. There's going to be full disclosure when they declass some of this classified information. It's going to provide the truth to the public. There's going to be foreign entities. There's going to be collaboration from overseas that's going to provide truth. And what happens when the media knowingly pushes false propaganda information? And that's what they've been doing. It's all propaganda. It's not the truth. I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. I just want the truth. And that's what we're looking for. What happens when the media can no longer be trusted? Because all that they are spewing out is lies. Look, Bill Gates is not a medical doctor. He's not a scientist. He is a computer geek. He started Microsoft. What gives him the qualifications to tell the world that they need a virus vaccine? He has the patents on these viruses. He has patents on these vaccines. He's part of the deep state that wants to depopulate the world. And we want to listen to him? We want to listen to the World Health Organization that is run by a former Marxist from Ethiopia, I think it was, or, well, I might not be right on the place, but he was a Marxist, and he also has included Lady Gaga in the World Health Organization. What's she got to do with it? What does she know about being a doctor or a scientist? Why do you have all these people that have no background in medicine being part of the World Health Organization. No wonder Trump does not want to fund the World Health Organization. They were the ones that were saying not to, close down our borders to certain countries. So anyway, we're in a war. And we have to realize what the enemy's tactics are and what the enemy is trying to do. We've got to gear up and fight this battle. It's up to us. It's up to us. But just understand your enemy and what they're trying to do. That's very important.